out. I've done numerous transformations across the supply chain, and it's really something that if you're in procurement and if you're looking at the future, you're always modifying your organization and trying to get the best practice. So today what we're going to do is we're going to look at centralized versus decentralized organizations and a few other organizational structures and talk about which one is the best one for your business and what are the positive and negatives about different organizational structures. We're also going to talk about how you get to transformational change, what are the other changes you have to make, and how do you get a return on investment for making a kind of organizational change and look at the future. So really, let's talk about some of the steps that you have to go through. When you're taking over as a CPO, you really need to know what you spend and where it is across the globe, both in the direct and indirect expenditure. And then what you really need to do is start to benchmark and baseline best practices. Now, there's lots and lots of places you can go to get these benchmarks. I know the CAPS, the old Center for Advanced Purchasing Studies, has lots and lots of benchmarks. Hackett, Spend Matters. There's lots of industry studies. And then one of the things that I've done with clients is we go out and we find the best companies, both in our industry and out of our industry, and look at what are they doing, what are their best practices. And you can't just look at the benchmarks. You also have to look at how did they get there, where were they, and what processes did they use to make a change. You got to be interested in that whole process of, what is the best practice, what's the best practice in your industry. But one of the mistakes I see a lot of company makes is they only benchmark within their industry. And unfortunately, maybe the best person in your industry is not the best in the world. So you want to make sure you benchmark both in and out of the industry for the most accurate understanding of what others are doing, what you're doing, and then you're looking to really define the gaps and map out, if I want to get to the world's best practice, and I've got some benchmarks, and I've done a baseline of where I am compared to others, I can look at those gaps, I can map them out, I can change what's required, and I can look at the required time frame. Now, what's important about the time frame is that some businesses can only take so much change, and they can only implement so much change at one time. So I can remember I went to a food company, and we saw lots and lots of opportunity to save a lot of money, restructure, enhance the team, bring on board new practices, and the chief executive was running an initiative on lean and couldn't do both at the same time. Excuse me. So you want to think about what is the gaps, how long will it take, and what is the cost of doing it, what's the return for doing it. Those are things that you have to present to your senior management. Then you want to move forward with a strategy that enables you to change the organization, change the processes, enhance your business systems, and then really develop the competency assessment and drive the competency of your organization. So that's really the crux of building a good procurement strategy is organization, process, systems, and people. Now, I go to a lot of companies and I talk to a lot of CEOs, and the CEOs always have a dilemma. And the dilemma is, should I be centralized or should I be decentralized? Well, when I think about centralization, excuse me, it allows companies to capture leverage and synergy, work across the globe, work at multiple units, and build really centers of excellence and really build category managers that understand the strategic categories. On the other hand, when you're decentralized, you actually leave control in the business units and you let the business units run autonomously. And this is always a big dilemma for CEOs to think about. So when we're looking at centralization, we capture leverage and synergy. We look at it, we can create a strategic plan for the business, and we can build the experts. When we look at the other side of the equation, we can keep all the business leaders happy. And we're going to talk about why business leaders object to a central organization, and we're going to talk about a whole bunch of structures that we can look at that define organizations. But one of the things that that really happens is business leaders or business unit leaders across the globe get very upset. We'll talk about why they do. And so a lot of CEOs will give into a strategy to just maintain business autonomy and really not optimize procurement. So that's kind of a dilemma that we'll dig into a little bit more. So when we're looking at a organizational change, one of the things we have to do is really weigh the options. Should it be centralized or should it be decentralized? And I'm going to give you a hint now. I think it should be neither. And we'll talk about what the optimal organization structure is and how you get there. But you need to optimize all the opportunities. And if you think about 10 business, I went into one automotive company and they had 10 business units, each with a contract with the same marketing company, different rates and different processes, and it was really being exploited by suppliers. So, getting those divisions to work as one, getting a contract that protects them all and makes good commercial sense is something you want to do. So you need to optimize the opportunity. You'll also, if you have a big global company and you've got really strategic categories, you really need someone as a category manager that understands the category, understands the markets, understands the suppliers within the market, understands the dynamics, and can really drive a competitive advantage for you. So that's another option that you probably need as a global company. You need to have some local control, and you can't really do everything from a center. And we'll talk about what kind of structure might enable you to do that. And you need to align both the business plans at the corporate level and the business plan at the division level. And you need to talk about how to marry and align the supply chain to service everything. Well, certainly, if we're looking at centralization and the positives and negatives, centralization provides a really strong category focus. It also enables you to really collect your leverage and really drive the importance of your company across the supply chain and get synergies across those divisions that are not operating very focused together. And the one thing you can do is you can actually focus on key strategic categories. So you really may want to look at what is the most important things for the company, what crosses multiple business lines, and that maybe are the things you want to centralize. The other thing you really want to get is control over the entire expenditure within the corporation on a geographic and global level, and you want to improve the commercialization or commercial aspects of your buying process. So those are the positives for centralization. The negatives for centralizations would be that most business unit leaders, believe that they'll lose control of the P&L. So they'll go back to the CEO and they'll say, I'm responsible for the P&L of this division, and you're taking a big portion of my P&L away when you take material costs away. Well, that may be true, but the counter argument from the CEO should be, you're measured on conversion. We all have categories and we understand the spend, and we work together with experts to drive that spend. So you should be measured on how well do you convert that material and market that material into the marketplace. The other thing that business leaders hate about centralization is they really hate the fact that they feel that if it goes to a centralized kind of expenditure, they'll lose focus. Right? Their business priorities won't get the kind of attention that it gets as a sole independent organization. But they do fail to recognize the leverage and synergy that will come. So they will feel that the procurement group is out of alignment with their strategic objectives. The other thing that they might worry about is that the service will become less because you're now in a matrix organization and you're really trying to service all the business units and be a support organization to multi-levels in an organization. And so that's another thing that they'll worry about as business unit leaders, is that the services over time could decline and they may not get the kind of service that they need. And then the other thing is, within a business unit leader and some of the support staff and some of the stakeholders have current relationships, and they're very concerned that if we take a global commercial approach, those relationships could be changed or damaged or not available in the future. And the loyalty to suppliers is another strong issue that impacts some business unit leaders. So there's two sides to the argument. All right, more opportunity and better strategic solutions from centralized, less opportunity but more autonomy for the businesses. So that's what we look at. Should we be centralized or decentralized? But I did say in the beginning of this workshop that I think there's some other options, and I'm going to talk about them now. When we look at it, we certainly know that we can go either centralized or decentralized. So the kinds of options that we're going to talk about in the next couple minutes is, a decentralized purchasing organization with no collaboration, a decentralized purchasing organization with limited and managed collaboration. We'll talk about centralized control, and we'll talk about center-led devolved delivery. And we'll talk about, should it be a profit center, and I'll give you some examples of companies that have made their procurement separate businesses and profit centers that get incentivized on how well they reduce costs and support the business. Or this is one that a lot of procurement people don't like, but you see it in some businesses where it's outsourced to a third party. Now, if I have a bias in organizational structures, my bias is to center-led devolved delivery. Okay, so let's look at these things. Decentralized, no collaboration, and where I see that particular organization structure is where you have really a financial holding company or a financial business or mergers and acquisitions where they've let the businesses operate independently. Purchasing covers a wide range of expenditure under the control of the local site management. So there's no integration between the global business strategy and the local business authority. Absolutely focused on internal customer need, high degree of customer service, always lean and mean. There's probably not a lot of effort in terms of building a strong purchasing organization or getting the best people, and it tends to be really focused on keeping the factory running, really focused on transactional and tactical procurement. The disadvantages are, again, you can't really exploit the synergies, and there's very, very parochial thinking, and no cross-business activity as a best practice. So that's kind of a limited opportunity and one which a lot of people are doing. And I think people go in and out of organizational structure. So at some point it might be centralized, then it may move to decentralized, and then back. So it's like a pendulum swinging. So decentralized purchasing with limited managed collaboration. And what I've seen here is organizations that are decentralized, but they try to bring together maybe a purchasing council or a collaboration cell, or try to work on certain levels of spend as a team. The problem is that the team isn't mandated to work, and while it's trying to do some good, it's really not focused on the best interest of the entire business. It still tends to be focused on the independent business. So a lot of time purchasing reports to a site, but they get together in teams and collaborate. They try to get the benefits of coordination without having any of the disadvantages of centralization or complexity of dual reporting, where you're having a dotted line to a business unit manager and maybe a straight line to a CPO or a VP of operations or VP of finance. And what you see here is, the lowest common denominator. Lots of resistance. Some people won't want to get into some deals. Some people won't want to do it. And you still appear to the supply base as a fragmented organization. I spent some time looking at centralized control. It really is a way to drive some control over all the sites. It cuts through organizational difficulties of dual reporting, maximizes leverage and volume, but it could be isolated from the local markets or the regional markets. So I said that I had a bias towards center-led, and I'll tell you how you get there. I mean, when I think about center-led, it really is putting a strong focus where you have leverage and synergy across a bunch of units, and you actually get a center of expertise on a few commodities to drive the benefits. And when you look at a Pareto analysis, you're probably taking 80% of the spend, and you're focusing it on very, very few suppliers and very few businesses. So you don't really need a big central organization. The other part of that is there's a lot of spend that tends to be regional, and we want to operate in regional markets. Sometimes the markets are set up for the regions. Sometimes there's an advantage to being on a regional basis. And when you're totally centralized, you really can't support local buying. So a great example was one of the first organizations that I transformed was in a pharmaceutical company, and there were lots of chemicals that went across all of the plants. And then in one of the small businesses in Michigan that was making baby formula, they were using milk. It makes no sense to buy milk in one place for a small plant. So you want to be center-led, you want to have a regional organization, and you want to have the ability to open and manage local needs. So when we think about an organization, a hybrid organization like that is the best. And I'll go into that a little bit more in a few minutes. It cuts through, it really avoids the tendency for isolated, distant, heavy-handed corporate control. It really integrates the business units and the center because there's really a three-phase organization, and it's easy to break away, and it's easy to kind of withstand local pressure too, because we're looking for the good of the organization. So I'll go into this one a little bit more detail. That's really my favorite one, and I'll tell you how you can decide how to go to center-led and how you break up your organization. Profit center. At one point, I knew that Chiquita Bananas in South America was running a profit center. So they were driving purchasing as if it were a business. It was getting savings. It was charging out its services to the individual business units, and then it was sharing it back. And I know at one point, maybe one of the big hotel chains was doing the same. So it operated as a profit center, made the money, and the returns were given back to the individual businesses. So it's trading accounts. It puts responsibility, authority, and accountability for generating benefits, and it makes a lot of sense, but not a lot of companies are really willing to step up and set up a business unit for procurement. And then outsourcing, the customer, may retain control over local sourcing, but they move to a third-party business process outsource company, and they do some outsourcing. It's easier to outsource a lot of the indirect than it is the direct materials, but it's an organizational option that really requires thought and a return. So when I said that center-led was one of my favorite organizations, it is because I look at the expenditure analysis, and you really can't start thinking about how you're going to make an organizational structure or how you're going to change your organization unless you know the spend. And once you identify the spend, you can identify what portion of the spend goes across all the units and can be done strategically, and it can be transacted and contracted, and then deliver it at the region or at the local site. So when you think about a global expenditure analysis and you think about those categories that are truly global, you find that all you have to do from a centralized point of view is put the contract in place and then manage all the transactions, the quality, and the supplier management from local sites. There are some markets, as I said, that are regional. They're defined in terms of how they operate, in terms of commodity management, in terms of pricing structures, and even in terms of, things like collusion and some other things that happen in business. So understanding how to operate in a given region like South America or Asia or India or the U.S., you really need people that understand those markets, and you also need people on the ground or regional directors on the ground that will take that centralized strategy and implement it across the region. So regional directors or regional processors work in two ways. They manage the regional spend categories, and they also execute strategies from the center. And as I said, you have to have an ability to operate locally and meet all the needs. So if you have an employee benefit program or something like that, you want that executed at the local level. You don't want it executed at a corporate level. So when you think about how to operate, you really think about the expenditure analysis. It's pretty easy to start breaking up what's the global spend, what's the regional spend, and what just gets left to the plant. Now, how you organize that in terms of reporting is, you put a CPO in. You could have everybody report to the CEO with dotted line to the plant, or you could have the local people and the regional people and the global people reporting to the center, local people reporting to the business unit at the plant site. But the whole point about making this blueprint and thinking about it is you want to think global and then act local. So the best way to go is to think about your organization as a global organization and think about the execution of transactions and tactical down to the local side. All right, so I kind of went through that. Categories across business units, categories that are strategic, really strategic to the business, and those categories across geographic borders or have tax implications or other implications for managing it at a global level. On a regional side, categories sold in regional markets are important. Categories with a regional impact are important, and the ability to execute in the region any global initiatives that you have going. And then locally, things that are better procured locally, low-value categories. You certainly, if you took the bottom tail of your whole spend and left it local, that would be fine. You put the goals in place, that would be great. And it's very strategic to the local business and not necessarily to the corporate business. So think global, act local, take a holistic approach, but think about how to structure in a center-led, devolved delivery mode of operation. So now that you've defined that, what else do you have to do? You've defined the hybrid organization structure. You know where you're going to go, but now you have to think about it. You have to develop the change process. You have to. The way I like to do changes, I like to have a steering committee in place, which are representatives of the region at the senior business stakeholder level and at the business unit stakeholder level. So a high level steering group design the architecture of the organization structure and really map out what are the steps, what do you have to do, who do you have to communicate to. When you put the plan together, we'll talk about this in a minute, but you should really put together the ROI. Because if I'm a CEO, first thing I want to know is what's this going to cost and what's it going to return. So I was working in an automotive company, and it was pretty interesting because they had built a purchasing department for their indirect spend that was only 11 people. Of the 11 people, 9 people were doing transaction, and 2 people were left with $4 billion in spend to build strategies. Obviously not a good process. 2 people were not capable of building strategies and executing $4 billion of spend. So there is a case where the organization structure was to break it out, it was indirect, so we had it actually locate in the business units, and we added some people. The cost of that was, I want to say, it was about $1 million, but the savings that came out of that thing in 2 years was $64 million, and that was on the plan. So that you got to develop the process, you got to develop the ROI, you got to link it to the business needs. So, you know, we really have to understand what are all the business needs and how are we going to satisfy those needs and how are we going to deliver those needs back to the business. If you don't have a commitment from senior management, both at the corporate level and at the site level, you're not going to get anywhere. So you need to make sure you have executive briefings, you socialize the idea, you get them on board, and you move forward. And show your baselining and benchmarking opportunities, and what have you learned, where are the gaps in our organization, and then how is a new organization and a new process going to change what we do and get us to best practice, get us not only parity with our competitors, but ahead of our competitors and to best class and leading our industry in procurement. All right, so then you got to look at, once that's all done and you got your top level understood and the organization understood, you got to define all the roles in the organization, who's going to do what, set up the priorities for attack, and then build the supporting guidelines and policies and definitions of how you're going to operate in a new entity. Beyond that, you're going to secure the outcomes. So what is going to be the cost down? How much cost are you going to remove? Where are the what are the synergies going to do? Where is the targeted value improvement? And then how do you get to strategic sourcing? And then what are you going to do with that? Then refocusing the effort and expertise. We're going to put our brightest people on the most important things. We're going to have standardized approaches across the business, and if you're decentralized, it'll be the first time you have a standard approach and a different way of facing off to the supply base, and best practice tools and guides and ways of moving forward. So those are some of the things we're going to do, and we're going to look at, you know, how can we set performance requirements and drive the performance not only to a new level, but to a level that we've never seen before. And to do that, we've got to train our team and assess their competence and give them the skill set that they need to make this move forward in the future. So here's a typical project, and this is actually a project that I worked on. And it really, the way it started was we went to all the division presidents and VPs and corporate stakeholders and asked them what they needed. We looked at what the current environment was, and it was one of those collaboration, coordinated, decentralized, coordinated organizations. We looked at how well they were doing strategic sources, how well did the processes they have in place work, what were the people's objectives and how did they work. We looked at the infrastructure for IS and IT. We looked at the competency analysis, and we developed a detailed gap analysis that we presented to the senior management. In this case, it was the CEO, chairman of the board, and VP of finance. We looked at moving on. We defined the roles, responsibilities, the process, who was going to do what, how was the accountability going to work. We built lots of process maps. We built an infrastructure for the program, generated options for the organizational models, and in this case, they chose the center-led devolved delivery. And we seek consensus that all the business leaders were on board with what we were doing. And then once we got an approval, we agreed to structure, which was hybrid center-led. We defined the management infrastructure. We defined the responsibility, roles, accountabilities, and authority. We defined what was our new mission, what was our vision, and then what were the goals that we were trying to achieve over the next 3 years. We agreed what the staffing level would be. We agreed what the process was going to be, and then we moved to transition the organization to a new level. And in that case, within 2 years, that particular organization generated $40 million in savings, and in its lifetime over about $400 million. So it was a really good thing. Now, as part of this process, Spend analysis is a critical part, as I said, and you really need a tool to help you with spend analysis. But you also need a tool that's going to help you do an opportunity assessment. And you know, that model to assess the opportunity, you have to look at where are the leveraging opportunities in year 1 and 2, where are the strategic categories, and how do we make changes in this to build a longer-term plan for the single-sourced and internal customer constraint categories, and then what's the cost of change, what's the return on investment, and what's the opportunity for the business to make this change. And if you don't have the thinking in place and you don't understand how you're going to get these opportunities, you can use a third-party consultant to help, or you can just generate them for yourself. But you're really going to have to go with a plan. You know, I worked with a friend of mine in the aluminum business, and he had a new CEO that came in, and he was very disappointed with the savings program. So we came in, and as part of this whole transformational change that we were proposing, similar to what I'm describing to you, we guaranteed the CEO that in a 8-month period of time he'd get $20 million, and in a 2-year period of time he'd get $200 million. And I think the expenditure was like $10 million to make the changes we needed to make. And the problem with it was a decentralized organization with a CPO that was responsible for strategy, but they didn't have anybody report to him. So he could identify the best strategy in the world. All of the people in procurement reported to the site, and if the site manager didn't want them to play with the strategy, they didn't. So he went back to his CEO and he said, I need the responsibility, the authority, the accountability, and I need control of the entire organization. And I'll give you $20 million in the short term and $200 million in the long term. I'm glad to say that he's an executive VP of the company now. He's on the board, and he is the senior VP of supply chain. So without an opportunity analysis, you don't go very far. This is an example that I borrowed from a company called ADR, and it just shows that this is a different company that was looking at $100 million spend, and mostly in the indirect side, and they were going to organize the opportunity in three levels. Here's a wave 1, a wave 2, and a wave 3. And in the wave 1, I think it was $10 million of the $100 million. Wave 2 generated another $10 million, and wave 3 wasn't quite so much, but it was in the new organization for indirect that they were able to achieve those results. So I think that that's a really important thing, and I think you have to define what you're going to do. So how are you going to manage the categories? Where would the strategy be in the development process? How are you going to engage the stakeholders? What's going to be the responsibility, authority, and accountable? Who's going to be the regional directors? Where are they going to be located? Which regions do we need to focus on? Where will they report? And then local is going to be how do you manage the transactional activities and drive it to a new level? And when you're looking, so we've talked about the organization, we've talked about the process. The other thing we have to talk about is you really need a system that can help you understand and divide these spends in the right appropriate levels so you can get the global spend to the global category managers, you can get the regional spend to the regional category managers, and you can get the local spend to the local category managers, and you have visibility across the organization, disciplines across the organization. So a system like Zycus is a good system that's flexible enough to let you make these changes to the organization and help you with the spend analysis and help you drive results. So you definitely have to be able to, there's only so many ways you can do purchasing. You've got to source, order, plan, and negotiate. Those are the kinds of things you have to do, and you need a good system that enables you to do that. All right, so we've been talking for 40 minutes now on organization structures. I think you really need to think about developing gaps. You really need to think about what's the right structure for your organization, and how will that structure be paid for? And there's nothing wrong with if you do identify a need for adding people, that's fine as long as you have the return on investment for adding them, and you have the performance measures to show that you're really making the gains in the structure. So I think that's really important. you need to think about how you're going to change the process and the systems to accommodate your change, and you need to develop your team and bring your team up to a new level of competence and capability. So, with that, that's about 40 minutes, and I've left a couple of minutes for questions.
Great, wonderful presentation, Bill. We have received some questions from the presentation. The first is, why do business units raise objections to centralized approaches? Can you please elaborate on that?
Sure. I mean, I led some ideas. Some of the things are that they feel that they're losing control. All right, so the very top executives feel that they're going to lose control of the P&L, and that they're not going to have the material spend. The other thing that's really interesting sometimes about the business units, or even down to the local operation, are if they're running very positive variances, it's a good way for them to kind of cushion profitability so that it doesn't look as bad. So you're going to take all the cushions away when you take materials away. And then finally, they don't want to interrupt the relationships that they have in some cases. And the other reason is because they feel that they're not going to get the right level of service. So they tend to throw those objections up at the beginning of a transformational change when you start to mention center-led or centralized type of procurement organization.
Okay. So the second question is, what is the best way to assess the team?
Oh, that's a really good question. There are some competency assessments, but I mean, I think the first thing you have to look at is if you're going to go down the path where you're separating out the global, the regional, the local spends, what are the competencies they need? So do they need, I did one today on expediting, and when I thought about it, expediters need negotiation skills, they need planning skills, they need some legal. So what are the competencies that they really need to do their job? So you think about, what is this job? What are the competencies they need? And then you've got to find a mechanism to tell you, do they have that competency or don't they? And then the long term is you bring in a training program and you focus it on it. And the best kind of training program is going to be a blended learning training program where you combine e-learning, classroom learning, and web-based learning like we're doing tonight.
And the last question for today, what is the best governance for an organizational change program?
I said steering committee was a good way to do it. I would probably never do a organizational change without first off the top level of the organization saying they want to do it, but then having a steering committee which involves those business unit leaders and involves the executive management and involves the functions like finance, so that everybody's on board with that change. And I'm doing a project now, and we have a steering committee just to make sure that everybody's in line and all of the stakeholders of these business units are on that steering committee. So if there's any objections or any roadblocks, I want to hear them as we start to present these ideas. I don't want to start into it without a governance system, and I want the leadership of the company to understand what the objections are and help us make decisions on which are the ways to go. So the senior level steering committee is critical, which includes the senior executives as well as the finance executives and the business unit leaders.
Bill, we just got another question. How do you arrive at opportunity assessment? Is it a percentage of spend or based on benchmarking?
That's a great question. The thing about I have to laugh at the way people do opportunity assessments, because I go to these companies and I look at them, and a lot of times I'm assessing them for this kind of a change. And a lot of times what they'll do is they'll look at their spend in descending dollar order, and they'll focus on the top 10, and they'll try and get some change or some revenue out of that. And then the next year, they'll take those same top 10 categories and they'll look at it again, and they'll take the next year, they'll do the same thing. So when you think about it, the top 10 categories are probably really well looked at and well managed. I think it's everything, the other 90% that's not even looked at. So what I like to look, the kinds of things that I look at are, I look at really what is the price and source flexibility of the category. So how much opportunity does the supplier have? How much margin, how much value add does the supplier have to change that price? And then how much flexibility does the procurement team have to change the spec if they need to? And then on the other hand is how much effort and expertise has been put into the procurement side. So I do have a matrix that looks at price and source flexibility as high, medium, and low, and then effort and expertise is, do they have a cost model? Do they understand the material, labor, overhead, and profit of the item? Do they understand the supply market in terms of, what is the supply market? Do they understand all the suppliers in the marketplace? And so I have a matrix that I've built, which is the effort and expertise across the bottom and the price and source flexibility across the top. And then I just kind of plot out where we've seen savings. So if we have a low effort and expertise and a lot of flexibility in the supply chain and our ability to change, we're going to have the highest level of percentage to save. So it kind of helps me prioritize what do I go after first, and it gets us out of that cycle of trying to take the top 10 items and look at the same items every year for 10 years and try and beat the crap out of the suppliers. So I want to take those things that we haven't looked at, get them to move up on the pile. So I want to look at the entire spend in terms of, how well are we doing it? How much time have we put into it? Do we have the right tools on it? And then I want to look at how flexible is this? What's the level of supplier margin, and what's the level of value add, and what's our ability to make change in our own company? So those are the things I look at when I do opportunity analysis.
Great. So that's all questions we have for today. So thank you, Bill, for the presentation. We'll be sending the recording of the webinar to all attendees within the next 24 hours. Thanks again for joining us. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Right.